On today's episode, we interviewed Rory Tyer, where we talked about really going from kind of business and coaching and going and doing your first search and buying a nursery and starting to dissect the nursery business, right? What it looks like, how the interaction went with the seller, how they structured it, and ultimately some of the questions to ask about a seller and a business, and really kind of what's happened since then. So, Casey, what's some of your takeaways?
Yeah, Rory's he's an executive coach prior to buying a business. So leadership and thought process and a lot of the way to dialogue and work with people, just probably a very master level.
Yeah, very methodic.
Very methodic. And you can tell that he's got a lot of just wisdom in that sense. But now he goes and buys a small business, right?
Yeah, which is really like kind of having interacted with him, not quite. He's not the kind of guy I would have thought would buy a nursery, right? Which tells you
no, and he bought a nursery and then he bought a business, and the owner and the seller walked him through the process of all the negatives too, right? Yeah. Very open and dialogue, but he got some trust. I do believe he got a very strong purchase price, multiple, all the above.
Yep.
And it was just I thought, incredible conversation. So, for those people that are looking for a nursery or thinking about this kind of space, want to think about how somebody went out and had a career and searched. And this is one of those podcasts you got to dive into.
No, absolutely. And I think, some of the other stuff that's kind of interesting to think about is really where's he taking the business moving forward, right? I did like the landscape design idea of, right, as an easy way to kind of tap in. You already know your business. You already know your customers, easy sell.
And he had two guys.
And you already had guys doing it. And that's kind of just a growth pattern from there. So, yeah. All right, lots to unpack in this one.
All right, guys, just take 1 second here real quick. When you're buying a business, ensuring the financial health of the company is critical. And that's where a quality of earnings partner comes in. Quality of earnings gives you confidence in the financials of the company that you're purchasing. It aims to protect your investment and ensure that you're stepping into a profitable business on day one. Patrick of O'Connell Advisory Group is your dynamic quality of earnings partner. He's here to help you buy the right business on your timeline. Patrick's entire practice is focused on business acquisitions. Your niche is his niche. And over the past decade, Patrick's helped more than 200 buyers like yourself successfully purchase and operate enduring, profitable businesses. In fact, Patrick's helped some listeners of this show. So if you're buying, looking for help with the quality of earnings, financial due diligence, network capital, and more, head to o'connelladvisorygroup.com or just click the link in the show notes.
Hey, Rory, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet, man. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I live in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm married. I've got 3 kids between the ages of 2 and 7. And in May of this year, I bought a retail nursery and garden center here. It's about 12 or 13 minutes from my house, depending on traffic. And I did a bunch of different things before that, but I had been looking for a business to buy locally for a couple of years. And so, yeah, we've lived here in Greenville since 2021, and really happy that I've got a business here now. So we're really putting down roots.
Love that business, by the way. I've driven by facilities and things like that.
We looked at one.
She had a fireworks stand that she also ran, highly profitable.
Really?
Business great, but they did a firework on top of what they did. It was, and not knowing exactly what all you do, but we were pretty impressed with the operation, the margins, and all that. So good for you on finding a good company.
And it would make a lot of sense too, because, around June, most retail nurseries, April and May are pretty big months. And then June, you start to see a slide in revenue. And then after July, like by the time you get to the end of June, you're about to transition to July, your revenue just craters. It's just extremely seasonal. So it actually would be an awesome thing to add. I'm like, do I have space in my parking lot? Like, could we set up?
There you go. Just give us 10% of those commissions. All right.
The way they do it is exactly what they do. It's Christmas, right? Or it's the New Year's, right before New Year's, 1 week, and then right before 4th of July. So
and both of those are like slow times. Yeah, both of those are slow times. It'd be great.
And they make cash. It's a cool business. So anyways, it's cool. We'll get onto that later.
Yeah. So was that your first acquisition, really quick, for the listeners?
It was.
All right. So what did you do before that?
So just before that, I worked for a couple of years for a very large, professional services and accounting firm. It's not one that a ton of people have necessarily heard of, but it was like the 23rd largest CPA firm in the US this year. So I was a director, and they initially brought me on. I had a contract with them with a consulting and coaching company that I had co-founded with a couple of folks. And they brought me in to train a bunch of their people who are future partners, right? So they had a cohort of 11 people because they'd grown a lot and they needed some leadership development. So I'm an executive coach by training, do a lot of leadership development and facilitation. And so they had contracted me to create and run a program for them. That went well, and then they offered me a job. And initially I was over there like internal learning and development program. But from day one, they asked me to come on as a consultant as part of a small team working with this like pretty large IT services company that their leadership team needed a lot of coaching. They were, it was founder led and he had like 40 direct reports. They were realizing it was a problem. So they brought us in to like help change that structure and focus on culture and trust, and did that for a while. And then eventually I shifted over and was doing that full time. And so by the time I left, I was working mostly with commercial construction and manufacturing companies. And so these are typically family run businesses, anywhere from like 30 million to 300 million in annual revenue were the clients that I was covering. And usually it's just some combination of they need recruiting help. The owner is burning out. Maybe it's a second generation owner and they're trying to make a lot of transitions and that's not going that well. They just realized the leadership team, it's a bunch of blue collar, mostly guys who started out like driving equipment and have worked their way up to now they're leading, multi-million dollar segments of the company, and they haven't received a lot of like formal leadership training. So I don't know how much you know about construction industry culture, but it's like typically
we have
rough,
one of those. So definitely we're buying another one. So we definitely know some of the culture in there.
Yeah, like the idea of hiring a leadership coach just in a lot of construction companies, just like, why are you wasting money on that? Or like, why are we doing group coaching as a team? But like it was really fun. Like I learned a lot about the industry and got to help with a lot of very real business problems like retention and communication and strategic planning. And before that, I did a few other things. I was vice president of a nonprofit for several years. I actually co-founded, like I said, a consultancy with a couple of folks, which is kind of what got me into executive coaching, got my certification. I've been a singer-songwriter in the past, an independent videographer. I was in seminary at one point. Like I've had an interesting path. So when I first learned about the idea of buying a business, I think the first mental model I had to shift was like, who can do that? Because it wasn't me. Like I don't come from a family background of parents that started or owned businesses. My dad and mom are both very much were career people. They're retired now, but
me too.
Yeah, it's yeah.
And so ultimately, what drove you to go buy a business, right? I mean, obviously, sounds like a fairly successful background, right? Jumping in and starting a business is a whole different kind of bag of worms.
Well, he was coaching people, and all of a sudden you realized he was like,
it's like if this knucklehead could do 300 million of revenue,
that guy can do it. I can do it.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. You realize as a coach, like when I'm coaching people, most of the time, the problem is not knowledge. The problem is action. And so either it's indecisiveness, like and we got to get at the root of like, what is it that's causing you to delay making this decision? Or they have already made the decision, but they don't want to act on it. And we have to get at the root at what it's delaying your action. Do you have assumptions about what's going to happen? Or you just need somebody to help you look at it from different perspectives. So when I'm coaching all these people, you start realizing like, it's not necessary. I mean, I've coached some very smart people, but it's not always that they're smart. It's just that they were persistent over a long period of time and they owned something. So that's the other, just the idea of the concept of owning assets. And I think this is probably still true for like a very large, maybe becoming less true as this stuff spreads more on social media. But like, I still think a lot of people don't understand the distinction between making money and owning assets that make money. Yep. And, so I was the first time this ever occurred to me, I was on Twitter and there was a guy, he was anonymous at the time. And he had this M&A masterclass, which was just like, he was a lawyer and it was very dense, like legalese, but it was all about like, lots of stuff to think about, mergers and acquisitions. I didn't know what M&A was. I didn't know what EBITDA was. And it just like, I couldn't explain why it was so interesting to me. I just read every newsletter he wrote out. And eventually I read the HBR guide to buying a small business. And so that book was like, I couldn't unsee things after reading that book. I was like, wait, there's like a whole government program, the SBA, that is literally designed for people that are not independently wealthy to buy businesses and ensure continuity. And then you can like run that business and get into it, even if you don't have that background. Like it was just it was honestly one of those moments where you're like looking at a scene for the first time and seeing a bunch of stuff that you never saw before. And so, I really enjoyed my job. I worked remotely. I like my team. I enjoy coaching and consulting. I still do have a handful of coaching clients, but I had to travel. The HQ for our company was not in Greenville. I'm the only person here and I've got young kids. So, travel it's fun up to a certain point. And then you keep going back to the same spot and you're like, this is not, I'm not like going to New York City a few times a month, right? It's other places. And so that just wore on me. My wife works full time and I was like, I want to do something different. Like what if I actually like owned a business that had deep local roots here in the community? And, initially I was open to remote businesses as well because I'm used to a remote working culture. But after a while, I started just looking around at what was around me. And that's kind of what eventually led me to contact the former owner of the nursery.
Yeah. You said a couple things there I want to kind of go back to. One of them was about the idea about the ownership, right?
Yeah.
I read a book by, it was Andrew Carnegie's biography. And one of the things he talks about is like he bought a steel car, like a rail car. He bought one. And it was the first time he generated income from an asset that he bought, right? And he said at that point, he realized that profits were better than wages. Mm-hmm. Even if you go without wages for a long period of time to get to profits. And that when I read that, that is what hit me in my entrepreneurial journey. I was already an entrepreneur, but I didn't realize exactly why or what that was, right? So very powerful, that mindset of ownership, right? That's a big piece. So that's off to you for going out and executing.
And you said something funny because we literally just had this conversation probably 30 minutes ago, which is, you didn't know about the SBA world, right? And once you see it, you're like, this is so obvious. We were talking about it really. We're talking about the conversation we were having was around, multifamily lending. And once you know about Fannie and Freddie, and there's a whole government agency dedicated to providing the best in class financing around that product. Well, it seems so obvious and so simple, but 99% of people don't know about it. And so again, knowledge is power. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that statement.
Yeah.
All right. So, And so then, you decided to go buy your own business. What did you have in mind at first? Right. And then let's talk about how you ended up with the nursery. Because I can't imagine you were like, you know what, I'm going to go buy a nursery. And that's going to be the
skating rink. I want a roller skating rink. I got 3 kids. I can just keep them going around in circles.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm like, and it's funny because brick and mortar retail is like, I knew because we weren't going to move to buy a business, right? So a lot of people, you search nationwide and you run this sort of massive outreach campaign. A lot of people will get interns to help them. And like, I'm not at that level. Okay. So I knew that I needed to be open to lots of different business models. And I felt confident like that at the core of most business models were things that I could understand. There's things you can't replicate, like industry experience and industry connections and like someone's specific work ethic or knowledge. But like, I was like, I can learn a lot of this stuff as long as I don't have to like get in and like become an electrical engineer doing a very specific process. And that's what the owner business does. Like, as long as it's not that, I'm sure I can learn. So I looked at a bunch of stuff and I would have told you that brick and mortar retail was not something I wanted to do because it has a reputation, and understandably so, of like, hiring is kind of your main challenge is like, not only do you have to hire people, but you have to train them. You have to schedule them out. You have a physical premises. So like in South Carolina and probably a lot of states, like you have the highest level of liability for a customer who's on your property because you're explicitly inviting them in. So like trip and fall liability as an example, like if a customer falls on your property and wants to sue you, the burden is against you in the heaviest way it possibly could be. You have to be able to demonstrate that you did everything you possibly could. And so, there's a lot about that. So I started looking at listings with brokers because it was like, well, these are businesses for sale. I can look through those, look on Biz by Sell, whatever. I got on a few broker email lists and, I just remember going through lots of cycles of like kind of being excited about a thing. And then you kind of go through learning more about it. Maybe you talk to the broker, you talk to the owner, and I would walk away feeling like either, wow, I'm kind of stupid. There's like a lot of obvious stuff that I should have asked or that I had to ask about and they can tell I know nothing. I should have done some more research. Or you walk away and go, they must think I'm stupid because the price that they want for this, there's just like, maybe I'm dumb, but I cannot think of a way to justify this. And so eventually you start to figure out which of those instincts are correct and which of those are not. And like, So I went through the cycle of looking at a lot of brokered listings. I looked at a lot of stuff that could be run remotely. I went pretty deep on a couple and found reasons to walk away from those. And eventually I got to a point where I just kept a Google sheet of businesses that I noticed around Greenville. Like I'd see a truck or I'd drive past a building, or I would like a couple of them I called to do work on my house. Like there was a plumbing company, HVAC and plumbing company. I was like, I might be curious. And I had some stuff I had to do in my house. So I called them and had them come just so I could like meet some of their techs and, maybe have a reason to call the owner afterwards or something. But it was it was 2 years. I'm working full time and it was not like it. I would not put forth myself as like a model for anybody the way I did. It was very haphazard, very like situational and like intuitive.
But you said something there. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No.
You said something that was like, but the difference, it goes back to like what you were saying with your coaching. It's about action.
Yep.
Like you went deep. You talked to brokers. You went down the rabbit hole. Like there are so many people out there that might be listening today that are searching but they're not engaging. Like
Yeah.
how many calls have you actually had with the owners, the sellers?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
I mean, some of the best, you have to do calls. You have to set a goal. I tell people all the time, like just 5 touch points a week. If you do nothing else, just like each week, I'm going to have 5 touch points with something. I'm going to send an email. I'm going to make a phone call. If you do that and just write down what you did, you'll look back in 2 or 3 months and you will have learned a ton and you will have made some progress.
And it's worth going deep. Like even you're like, okay, I'm going deep here. Like I'm going to go in. You probably saw some red flags. And then all of a sudden you're like, but I'm going to keep going because I'm learning.
Yeah, you learn something new from every meeting with an owner. It does, like 100%. Seriously, you learn something about the business, the industry, their background, how they structured something, the screw ups they did. I mean, you have to be comfortable constantly learning, right?
Yep. And you learn about what works. Like, what questions can I ask that, and this is something that actually had part of my coaching background that helped me. Like when you start a question with the word why, it almost always triggers a slight defensive reaction in people. It's like inherently defensive. So why did you do that? That question. It's a perfectly reasonable question. Like if I'm coaching someone and they tell me like, hey, well, this is what I did yesterday. This is how I responded. I might say, well, why did you do that? Immediately they're on the defensive. There's a whole lot of other ways to ask that. I can say, what led you to that action? Or like, where do you think that came from? That's another really great way. And that's what you're trying to get at. Is like, why did they do that? But you don't have to say that. Same thing with talking to business owners or negotiating any of these transactions. Like you need to find a way to ask questions that put them in the driver's seat in the sense that like owners love to talk about themselves and their business. They love telling stories. And at some point you have to do actual diligence. You have to push people and doing it in a way that like I had to learn, like as an example, I sent a stupid email to a broker once in a business that I had met the owner for one time in person. And I had a bunch of questions about the numbers and about the model. And I decided I'm just going to list these questions out and send this to the broker, which was really dumb. Like I should have just called him on the phone and been like, can I talk to you about a couple of things? And I probably should have chosen my questions more carefully. And I sent those questions and the broker responded with like a single email. He was like, we disagree with some of your assumptions. We're not going to talk anymore.
No, what you're talking about is the art of positioning. I talk to my partner about this all the time. And the same point you were having, I mean, I was literally talking about it last week to someone that reports to me, and it's basically, you lead with, hey, I saw this. Here's how I came to the conclusion. Can you walk me through how you interpret it? Right? Like that's let's collaboratively go solve this thing and work ahead of it versus, hey, like this is BS. Tell me why it's not BS. 100%. Like and I mean, it's a skill you build over time. So,
all right. So you found this company. You're kind of jumping into the company, right? So
really quick, was this the first one that you moved forward on, or was there a different one before that you made some real progress on that fell apart?
Yeah, I signed a letter of intent with this remote company. It was really a small consultancy that really was centered around this one guy and his history. So the business was not transactable. And I, at that point in my journey, I was too eager to get something under LOI. And I didn't fully think through like what the guy needed to, in fact, I haven't kept in touch with them and I'm curious if anything has happened because he wanted a lot of money for it. But basically this guy was working with a very particular client. He had been doing a lot of in-person consulting around some revenue drivers for that particular industry and that client. And he had transitioned that into a Zoom-based group coaching thing. So in my mind, I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is super scalable. You have a curriculum, you have a bunch of reviews and proven results. And I think what I underestimated was the extent to which, like, he had CEOs of these target companies who would just call his phone, and like talk with them. And it's really difficult to transition that kind of a thing unless you do it over a few years as a mentorship. And I ended up sort of proposing that to him after we'd already signed an LOI. And I sort of had like a moment of like, well, this doesn't make sense. I don't know what I was thinking. And that was on me. Like I wasted a bunch of his time and the broker's time. There were a couple other things that I should have caught. And I told them, I said, this is on me. I apologize that I didn't think some of this through. And that learning was really valuable to me. Like it grew my self-awareness. I was like, okay, I'm a little too eager to buy a business because I like the idea of leaving what I'm doing. And that's a little bit of a beef that I have with a lot of the content around this is like, I don't want people listening to this to think that being enamored with the idea of having your own company is enough of a good reason to go out and risk a lot of things to buy a business, especially not with a personally guaranteed loan. And at that point, I would have been willing to take a risk for really bad reasons on a company that I should not have taken that risk on. And I walked away, which felt bad at the time and then felt good as I got further from it. I did feel bad that I wasted his time. But so that was the first one. I had a couple serious conversations with others, but they didn't go to LOI. There was a local company. So interestingly, my first real foray into looking at local businesses was I made some posts in some local Facebook groups. So my neighborhood Facebook group here, like the way our neighborhood is, there's a bunch of areas where I know business owners live. And so I just made a post, hey, I'm looking to buy a business from someone who wants to retire. And I got like 3 or 4 leads. One of them turned into a short-term consulting project, paid, with the mutual understanding that like we're going to try to see if this could be a good fit. And it wasn't. We figured that out after a few weeks, but we ended on good terms. I got paid a little bit. They got some help with the way they were structuring their offer for the business, for what drove their revenue. So that was encouraging. I was like, okay, I can get into a context and learn something quickly. This is what I do as a consultant anyway. So let me keep doing that. And so the nursery, I had gone through kind of a dry period where I didn't have many leads. We had moved here in 21, right? So my wife and I like to landscape and garden together. Since we've had kids, we involve them in it. It's a great, you can just have.
My wife and I used to do together too. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's a great hobby. And so we've been buying plants at this nursery, and the way our property is, it sort of feels like you're in a park. So you kind of go down from the main road a little bit, and we've got all these mature trees all around the whole property and a few huge pines on the property. And the Reedy River actually borders one side of the property. You can't see it that well, but if you walk over there. So it just feels, and it's like our building is old, right? The nursery will be 60 years old next year. The building is not quite that old, but it's old. So it feels kind of rustic, kind of like, and it's a big property. You can walk around for a while and see like all these plants. And so someday I just got it in my head like, this seems like a healthy business. And it also sort of feels like a business that's run by someone that's in it for a long time, because they have no marketing. You can tell there's stuff that just hasn't been updated or changed. And so I sent him an email, and my initial pitch was, I would like to own a business someday. Here's a little bit about what I do. I'm interested in meeting business owners to interview them about what it's like to run their business. And I love your nursery. I've been buying plants from there for the past couple of years, but I've never worked in one, and I don't know what the business is like. I'd love to interview you just about what it's like.
The soft sale. I like the intro.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah. And I think more people should consider that, especially if your goal is to like build trust with somebody local, where you can just say, I live here, I'm doing something, but I'd like to do something like what you're doing someday. Can I just buy you lunch? And so it worked really well. He eventually, by the time we connected on the phone, he's a super straightforward guy. So at some point on the phone, that first phone call, he was just like, why are you interested? And I said, well, I don't know whether your business is the one I want to buy, but I'm looking to buy one from someone who wants to retire. And there's no pressure to talk about this right at this moment. But if you are at all interested and you've thought about retiring, I would love to keep having conversations about that. And knowing now what I know, it was like very much just right place, right time. He had been thinking about it. His daughter had just gotten pregnant. So, grandchild on the way. And he'd been in it for like between 25, 27 years. He bought the business from the founder, back in like the early 90s. And so,
so he was already aware of the buy.
So he was.
Yeah. And that's an underappreciated aspect for me. A lot of business owners have never either bought or sold a business. They've just founded and run one. And so I providentially like hit the jackpot with somebody who not only was familiar with the concept, had done it himself, so understood the pressures that you feel as a new buyer. It's very different, right? Running a business with debt on it is extremely different than a business that's been profitable with no debt because you've just bootstrapped it. And he also I found out later, he was part of an industry group, and there's a consultant in that group that had done a business valuation exercise for him, I think a year and a half before we talked. And that gave him a range, and he had kind of anchored to that range, and it was very fair. And the business had grown since then, but that's what he was still anchored to. Okay. And so he revealed that pretty early on. We had a sit-down meeting. I told him, listen, again, no pressure, but I'll need to know some sense of what your tax returns have been like the past 5 years, because that is what a lender is going to want to look at. And so again, no pressure, but whenever you decide you want to share that, and like he had them in a manila folder for me, for like the first or second in-person meeting. And I remember looking at them because it's an inventory heavy business. I knew that it was seasonal. I had no concept of how much money, and like, it's not the largest business in the world, but it made more. I mean, I think his discretionary earnings, I would say average over the past 4-ish years, was probably around $800,000.
Okay. That's healthy.
And it is. And he was playing zero tax games. Like, a lot of owners will run everything they can through the business to try to minimize their taxes. And that makes it difficult when you want to sell, because you have to try to justify to a lender, no, it actually made this much. It just never made it to our tax returns. And that game you almost can't win. And so for him, that was not, it was just, he had just made honest money and paid honest taxes.
Nice. Makes it easy.
Nice. And he was a super high integrity guy. He was at the nursery today. Actually, I was I caught up with him for like an hour because we had an employee issue with somebody that had been working for him and is now working for me, and just wanted his perspective on it. And so,
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was. He's a great guy. Like,
yeah, it's a big, good advice. Like, there's a good lesson moment for our listeners is, we have been very successful with keeping the owner involved. Like having them around, having them a part of, it's the legacy conversation, right? They love these things. It's their life. And that advice and having that resource, oh man, it is huge.
Especially if they're seller financing you or, providing 100%. Some of the equity. So
100%.
And you, just as much as you're doing due diligence on the business, you really should do diligence on the owner and really understand, is that because you're, typically, where it's not just a rid your hands of it. Again, people structure some of their deals that way, but the deals that we're doing, we're in it for a couple of years with the owner, and you want a good, healthy working relationship, and that's paid dividends for us.
So did you get seller financing? Did you?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, so really quick, so it was 800,000 SDE.
Yep.
What was the multiple you bought it at?
All in, it was about 2.5 million.
Okay, so a little over 3.
2.6.
Nice.
That included like $600 some thousand dollars, $700 some thousand dollars in inventory.
Cool. So he included inventory into that value. Yeah. That's really nice.
So, that also included the real estate.
And I was going to ask about the real estate. So so you bought the business at a 3.1 all in with the real estate and everything else. Yeah. What do you think the real estate's worth?
It appraised for $520,000.
Nice.
And so this guy, just a little bit of, SBA insider baseball in case this is helpful. So when you purchase a business that has real estate, sometimes like in my industry, I'll use an example of a grower, right? So growers tend to have a lot of acreage, and it is almost always the case that the value of that acreage to a developer is way higher than the cash flow that the growing business that they have generates. Okay. And it can create a problem. Like if I wanted to go to one of my growers, and I've thought about doing this and asking to buy them out, like there's no way, like the economics are just so upside down typically for the cash flow that the business generates compared to the value of the land that, but there's ways to make that easier. One way is you have a good portion of seller financing. Another way is if the value of the real estate is 50%, 51%, I believe, or more of the total transaction, then you can combine, I believe, you can get like blended amortization with the SBA. And so there's like
the 10-year and the 30. You get the 10 and you get the 10 and the 25. Sorry, the 10 and the 25.
Yeah, blended. And so in my case, it was reversed. It looked a lot more right-sized. And so I had two separate loans. I had the 7A and the 504B. And the 504B has 25-year amortization. The 7A has 10. And what the owner was willing to do, so the land appraised for higher than what we had agreed on. And he was okay letting me shift some dollars from the 7A loan. Because, in the purchase agreement, you have to be very clear, like what is the value we are assigning to this, even though it's all one bucket. And that's what he was most concerned about was what's the one bucket. But he was happy to let me move some money from the 7A to the 504B to lower my debt service, my debt payments.
Yeah, you always want to maximize that amortization.
Yes. Yeah. And my lender was willing to lend up to 100% of the appraised value. Right. So there's an amount we agreed on. There's what the lender was willing to lend to, right? Because that's what it appraised at. And so that difference, I was able to pull from the 7A, which had, again, shorter amortization. Yes. So that was fun.
So then let me dissect it real quick. So you bought it for roughly 2.5.
Yep.
Right. The real estate was worth 500,000. You had essentially inventory worth 700,000. So that's 1.2 million. And so really, so really the business portion you bought for 1.3 on 800 SDE, right?
Yes.
So, you're buying it for 1.5x essentially is one way to look at it. Right. So that's a sweet deal.
And it is so, and I'll, right on the face value, the numbers, and this is where having, being connected with industry insiders and using a lot of critical thinking is super important because yes, face value, those numbers sound awesome. There's also, and this is, so I would say the seller is probably 50% of why I went forward with this because I figured out really quickly that he was super honest. I mean, he would casually bring up super unflattering things about the business in conversation, just like, by the way, you should know. I was like, man, if I were in your seat, I would have saved that card, but he's high integrity. He's a Christian, we shared faith and we connected on that basis. And like, just, you can't, that's just the sort of seller's like a dime a dozen. And so I was like, man, I got to do this because I know that I can trust him. So one of the things that since I've been on a couple other podcasts and I've had conversations with people who are looking at nurseries or something in the green industry. And what I tell people is, I feel like the multiple I paid and the price I paid, I do think it was a little bit low because money was not his top concern. His top concern was the business continuing on, being in the hands of somebody like-minded. And he has 2 kids that still work for me in the business, and he wanted them to have, to be set up to have long careers if they want it. So that's one thing. I mean, he was anchored to a valuation that was a little bit out of date, but he was not the sort of person that wanted to push that because money wasn't his prime concern. The other thing, though, is that multiples are sort of meaningless until you make them concrete in a particular industry. So for a retail nursery that doesn't grow anything, right? We only, we buy it from wholesalers and sell it retail. There's a bunch of stuff that you have to think about. Number one, you buy inventory and now you got to keep it alive, right? It's not like a widget that can sit on the shelf for forever and still be useful. So some of your inventory could potentially be getting more valuable. Like you could maybe grow something and up pot it, although technically you need a different license than when we had to do that. So we don't do that. But a lot of your inventory is becoming less valuable. And so you're either going to end up needing to discount it to move it, or you're going to have to put it in the trash. Or it's just going to die, because that happens. And that's number one. So it's not just any retail business. It's retail with a significant expiration date on most of your inventory. The second thing is some of his most knowledgeable and hardworking team members are at or near retirement age. And so there is a cliff coming for me over the next couple of years that's going to be pretty significant. So I've been hiring to try to start training up people ahead of that, but he was aware of that. He didn't have any formal management structure. So he had a pretty flat team with very little formality. They had no team meetings. They had no one-on-ones. They had just in the beginning of this year adopted a brand new point of sales inventory management system, which I'm glad I was brought in after that learning curve, but we've been optimizing it. But the property itself needs some upgrades. The building is at the point where I can't upgrade anything about it because it is not up to code. Like if I change anything, we only have one bathroom. It's like an 8.5 acre property. We have one bathroom. And if I want to put a new one, I have to bring everything up to code. So that's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Weather, if we get 6 rainy Saturdays in spring, right? The seasonality in general, we make probably 70+% of our revenue in about 3 months in the spring. And then the summer's kind of dead. And then you get a bump in the fall, which we're
you got to sell fireworks
right now. Right. Yes. So we have Christmas greens and stuff right now, but the volume of that and the activity is nowhere near what it's like in the spring. And if you have 6 rainy Saturdays in the spring, we don't have a ton of covered outdoor shopping. Even if we did, your revenue is just, it can tank the whole rest of your year and you don't really have an opportunity to make that back up. And so I say all that to say, and there is some analog to this in basically every industry, I think. And in mine, it's just there's all these factors, not just about the industry, but about this specific business, this building, these people. So I feel I think I got a good price, but I don't think I got a bargain in the sense that I think there's a risk premium that the owner was very self-aware about, that it was sort of baked into how we negotiated. So I just want to make that clear, because if you just have the numbers, it makes it sound oh my goodness, this is I feel wonderful about the business and about it, no doubt. And this is one reason I really like proprietary searching, because I think if you can find someone that you can build a trusting relationship with and educate them, you can often get something for under market, which I think is great. But in this case, I don't think it was that under market because of some of those risks and some of the real factors about the business.
Wow. Fair enough. No, it's a fair way to look at it. And so I guess, to bring it all home, you're roughly 7-8 months into it now?
Yeah. So May 7th was the first day. So yeah, I guess a little over 7 months.
So how are you feeling about it?
Yeah. Right now is an awesome time. It's the fall. It was a beautiful fall day today. I have a little deck out back of where I have my desk, and I can look back over the back part of the nursery, and there's this beautiful tree. So most days I feel incredibly blessed and thankful. Even when I'm stressed, I feel that way. I will say a couple of surprises. So the team is actually more competent than I even understood that they were. And so I'm not the one that has to open or close the store. And that's the thing that when you look at in-person retail, if you want to buy something, you have to commit to you may end up being the person that has to unlock it in the morning and close it down and clear out the register drawers in the evening. And you might have to be the one cleaning the bathrooms and so on and so forth. And I knew all that going in, and I was anticipating I have to do that more than I've had to. And that's been a gift because I've gotten to spend more time with my kids as a result. And I've gotten to work on some strategic stuff like marketing, which the business hadn't really done. But now we have a newsletter. We have a customer loyalty club. We have, I've got a couple of little local sponsorships in the community. And, we're working on a better signage program on the property, stuff like that. So,
work Work on the
I
business,
dealt
not in the business.
yeah, and I'll get even more there. There's some key people that I'm setting up for more leadership roles and helping to train them. And
Yeah, I can
so
imagine
we're
the training stuff would be right up your alley, man, to get everybody out.
Well, and let me tell you, this has been humbling for me. So I mean, a lot of my work is like leading team, like facilitating meetings, right? Trainings, all this stuff. And I'm used to doing it in a blue collar environment too. Like I'm coming to these construction companies and like, a lot of them, it's like talking about emotions is we just don't do that. Right. But we have to talk about things like fears and hopes and all that stuff. Well, so with this team, there's like a logistics challenge. We're open from 8 to 6 during busy season, right? And so every time you're open, there has to be at least like 2 or 3 people who are watching the register and are outside ready to greet customers and help them. So if you're gonna have a team meeting, you either bring everybody an hour early. So now you're paying everybody an extra hour of payroll and making them get there at 7 or 7:15 or whatever. Or you make them stay late, or you adjust your hours. But then not everybody's scheduled to work that day, right? Like we have about 16, 17 people on staff and maybe only 10 of them might be there that day. So what we've done is I have 2 team meetings on a Monday and a Tuesday at 9 a.m. So I've got 3 or 4 people that are in front, everybody else is upstairs. But even that, it has been hard for me. Like I have my own self-limiting beliefs that I've had to deal with around like, I don't know how much people actually enjoy this. Are they even getting anything out of this? Like, does this matter if we have a team meeting every other week? And like, it does matter. And their enjoyment is not the point. I want them to enjoy it, but that's not really why you do it. And it has been way harder than I like to admit to coach myself through that and do it. As somebody who, feels like I understand how people work and I'm used to coaching and leading people, which I am, it's just, it's different when it's just a very different pressure.
You said something though.
I've been a little humbled.
You said something earlier though, that was $30 million to $300 million companies.
Yeah.
Right. So you're coming into a lower middle market company that, you have an audience, you have a team, you have a group of people. Right.
Yeah.
And this time you're talking to 3 or 4 people at a time and you're just like looking at yourself like, are they hearing anything?
And in nursery, typically, it's probably younger people too, right? And so it's not.
A lot of them are aging.
Yeah,
there's like this. It's kind of like a barbell distribution. Like we've got a number of folks who are in their low 30s and a little younger, and then we've got a couple folks in the middle, and then we've got folks who are in their 60s and older. And it's like, and a lot of it is just the culture. I think that the deeper point here for anybody is shifting. Number one, it's almost impossible to fully understand a business's culture until you've been swimming in it for a while. I got to work in the business for a month before we closed because he found out that some of his employees were talking about, like they had discovered that he was going to sell it. And he decided, I don't want there to be rumors. Let's just bring you in on a Saturday morning and introduce you and we'll let them know that it's not done, but we're working toward that. And then I just started showing up every day to like learn everything I could. And that was really valuable. But like I learned maybe a tenth then of what I know now, about really the culture. And the culture is like what people assume. It's how people act when they're not thinking about what they're doing, right? Like this is stuff that you don't really know until you are around people in deep and you experience conflict, right? That's when you start to understand culture. So changing that, like one aspect of our culture, I would say has been informality, has been the previous owner was really the driver of a lot of stuff. If leaves needed to be blown, he would just go out there and blow the leaves. He would like float between all kinds of things in the business, and like meetings and structure was just not part of the culture. And so, there's a part of it where like I respect and care for these people. A lot of them know way more than I'll ever know about plants. I don't want to do something that's unnecessarily frustrating. And also I genuinely believe if we can like nudge in the direction of having some more structure, it's going to be better for everybody. And at a certain point you have to realize like some people are going to get on board with that and some people are not. And you can't let whether other people are on board be the ultimate barometer of whether you made the right choice, because that kind of feedback can only get you so far. At a certain point, and again, I had somebody leave. We were setting on an early retirement date and this person left early without telling me because they were frustrated with me and like said some pretty hurtful things. And, you're just like, okay, like I have to just keep going and doing the things that I think are right and trying to care. But the reality of getting into an existing culture, and you don't underestimate how difficult it can be to both understand, but then let alone try and change an existing culture if you're thinking about buying a business. Like you just can't underestimate that.
There's so many facets to the company. Like when you thought about searching for a company and finding a business and now you're in the business and you're realizing like, oh my God, not only are you the psychologist, you're the bottle wash it's like, there's all these other things that you just did not 100%. Know that were there. And I've been through a few now, and I've been through a lot over my years of just as an entrepreneur and I'm still just blown away at how it really comes down to the people in so many ways. And
100%.
So it's just, but you're going to get it. You'll get it. 7 months is still kind of early.
Oh, it's still new.
But once you
I tell people, I'm like, look, I don't know that I've succeeded yet. Like,
well, no,
we're doing okay. I'm happy, but
you succeeded in a search. You succeeded in the part where 90% of the people listening today may never, ever get to, which is a huge success, right? But the cool part is that you've bought a business and you have a relationship with the seller that right there alone, you're going to have success. We just don't know to what extent is your success, right? And the only way you know that is whatever that next phase of what you're doing. Because I can already tell you're already thinking about another acquisition. And so you've got now a baseline as you stabilize, land the plane. At H&M, it's taken us about 2 years, 18 months to land the plane. And we only lost 2 engine and a tail wing, it's like, and we didn't hit the runway on a full dive into the ground. We scraped it and we came back up the other end. That's kind of the joke, but it's like, that's the integration part, right? You're coming in and you're just right at that point. It's just, that's the fun part, man. But I can already tell you're already thinking like, what are the strategic buys?
No, and that was going to be the last question I was going to ask. I mean, are you still looking to acquire more, or are you just going to double down and just kind of, build up what you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the main changes I made a couple of months ago was we launched our own in-house like landscape design and installation. I had a couple of young, ambitious guys who were doing it on their own and like working themselves to death because they would work full days at the store and then go do their own thing. And I said, guys, let's like bring this in-house. I think you're undercharging. I think I can help you level up your marketing and our brand and our customer service, and we can raise our prices and we can like run this more efficiently and we'll like all do better. And so far that's been proving out. I would love to buy like a landscaping company or like a niche, like an irrigation company or something like that. So I've also, my background is in professional services, and I've thought about a professional services company. So I'm leery of diving into another company that's totally different before I really feel like I have designated named leadership positions and a lot more structure in place at the nursery. Yep. But I think if I found a small landscaping company where it made sense and I could add experienced people and equipment at a reasonable cost to what we've already got going, I think that would be right in my alley.
You've got a foundation. That's the key, right? Yeah. Build that foundation, get it deep. That. And then the scale is going to be there.
Awesome, man.
It's exciting, man.
All right. Well, we can go ahead and move on to our rocket round where we ask the guests the same 3 questions. So first question, what do you like to do in your free time?
I love to read really nerdy fantasy novels, like lots of nerdy. Like if anybody wants recommendations on like, what is a world that I can get into that'll last me like 10 books and I can forget about reality, I've got that for you.
No kidding.
So yeah.
That's awesome.
All right. That's a good one.
And so what's your most memorable moment in your business journey?
Oh man. I think there are probably 2. So one from a while back, I remember the first time I was paid to fly. I don't remember what country this was. I've gotten to do leadership development and facilitation in a few different countries. And early in my career, I got to go alongside one of the people I co-founded that consultancy with. And I remember being up at the front of the room facilitating and leading this group of like multinationals and part of this big nonprofit. And it felt like kind of an out of body experience. Like, how am I here? I'm in this other country, I'm like leading this whole room in this really impactful experience. How did this happen? So that's one, but that was the beginning of, I think, me like broadening a view of the world of like, wow, a lot of things are possible. And then I think honestly, the feeling of getting through the closing on this business, like I can remember when the final papers were signed and I could just come to the nursery and like, okay, that's behind me. I can just do this. And then you start realizing like, oh, the business, like money is coming in and I'm not personally doing work. Like I'm a coach and a consultant. So I'm used to like, if I don't work the hour and do the thing, the money's not coming in. So I think that first few weeks, I just remember being like, is there any money? Like, is everyone going to stop coming? Like, is it just going to fall apart? So I think that when I was like, oh my gosh, I think this might've worked. Like that moment was big.
Awesome. Huge. It's a great moment.
All right. And last question, what's your favorite tool or resource?
So when I did a lot of leadership development, I used a collection of tools called Leadership Essentials, and they were like developed in part by one of the guys that I co-founded this former consultancy with. And there's a particular framework that's super easy to remember. It's called SBI, and it's a Situation Behavior Impact, and it's a framework for giving feedback that can actually help change people's behavior. It can either reinforce specific behavior or help like draw out the consequences of and limit behavior. And so, because I think in a lot of the situations I'm in, a lot of situations I see in my business, it's like people don't know how to give feedback to each other. They don't know how to say it because they don't want to make people defensive. They don't want to come across the wrong way. There's not a culture of like high candor. And so situation behavior impact is the idea that if I'm going to give you feedback, I need to start by bringing you back to the situation. Hey, remember yesterday when we were on that call with the prospect and you were taking the lead. Behavior is like call out the words or the actions that they did in a non-judgmental way, right? So at some point you interrupted the prospect as they were asking a question because you wanted to highlight a feature of our product that you thought they were really interested in. And then you get to impact, which is the impact on you when that happened and or the perceived impact on somebody else. And I might say, when that happened, I felt a little bit alarmed because it seemed rude to interrupt. And I sensed that the prospect felt kind of flustered because they were in the middle of trying to like ask us some questions, but you just immediately jumped to a feature. And so I sensed that like they were a little bit reluctant to talk after that. And why this matters is because when we're in a sales process, we want to make sure to put the client, like the prospect, at the center and their needs, not our product. Right. So in like a very short amount of time, I use situation behavior impact to give feedback to help somebody alter their behavior. And I think if more people practice that, it can unlock like a lot of personal growth.
Cool. All right.
I love it.
Awesome. Well, hey, Rory, thank you very much. Pleasure.
How can people get a hold of you?
Thank you guys for having me. Yeah. So I'm pretty active on Twitter or X, whatever you're calling it. It's just at Rory Tyer. You can find me on LinkedIn. And those are probably the two best ways to get hold of me. But yeah, if you're thinking about buying a business, whether it's in this industry or not, I searched for a long time and I'm now in it. And whatever help I can be, I would be happy to be helped.
Fantastic. So nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Good to meet you guys too. And thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to the M&A Launchpad Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's podcast and would like to support us, please leave us a rating and a review after you listen. I'm Casey Minshew, and I look forward to talking with you next week.